Hello everyone, Republic Jim here. I apologize for the cluttered background here. I'd meant to do this video on a hike around our acreage, but unfortunately it was overrun by mosquitoes at that point. And then today it's been rainy all day, so I'm doing this in the barn by my gym area instead. But this is a different topic than I have ever done on my channel. It's completely different from things I normally do, whether it's my workouts or outdoor, overnight campouts and that sort of thing. But it's a topic that has interested me quite a bit lately. I've been following online various updates and all the comments and opinions. And so I wanted to just give some of my opinions on the manhunt for Travis Decker. For anybody that is unaware of that, he's the guy who's accused of triple murder of his 3 daughters. And there's a big manhunt going on over kind of in the edge of the Cascades. It's been 3 weeks now since the crime took place, and they still have not located him. There's occasional updates still coming out saying that they're closing in on him, and all sorts of just things from the sheriff's department saying, how he could have changed his appearance and this and that. Spoiler alert here, in my opinion, he's not where they think he is. They're not going to find him there. I think basically either he is completely out of the area or he's no longer living. But, I'm not an expert. I'm not in law enforcement. And if they do happen to catch him and he's where they're looking, then I will freely admit that I was wrong about it, and I'll post an update. But this is just my opinions based on the evidence so far. I'm not completely without any sort of knowledge on this sort of thing. I've been a search and rescue member since 2012 and vice president of our team for several years. I've been involved in quite a few searches and been personally responsible for helping locate a couple of lost subjects and helped save at least a couple of lives in that time too. And I took a multi-day course on lost person behavior that was taught by Bob Kester, the guy who literally wrote the book on that topic. So I do have some insight into how people statistically tend to behave in different situations. But anyway, I'll try not to drag this out too long. Let's just get right into it. As I said, my 2 thoughts on where he is are either just completely out of the area or no longer living. There's actually 3 different scenarios that I think are possible. I'll go over them. And let me explain one thing that affects my thinking on this is that right after law enforcement located the campsite where the crime scene was and Decker's truck was there, they brought in dogs, they searched the area, and then almost instantly the search went area-wide. They closed down all access to the national forest for a few days, and shut off roads and hiking trails and campgrounds and everything, and they were searching everywhere in there. They had ground teams and dogs and helicopters and whatever, which to me indicates that the dogs did not pick up any scent trail. And, granted, Decker had like 3 days from the time that the crime was committed until they located the site. But even after 3 days, a good dog should be able to pick up some sort of scent trail. So if they'd established any sort of direction of travel, then they would have narrowed their search a little more instead of just casting such a broad net. But if the dogs were unable to pick up any scent, then to me, there's really only two logical explanations for that. One is that possibly he left the campground area on foot, but in water, and traveled a fair distance in the water just to throw him off the trail. You know, that may or may not be very likely. I'm sure the water is very cold there, but it is a possibility. The other option is that he left the scene in a vehicle, whether he was alive at that point or not. Either way, he could have left in a vehicle, and that would not have left any scent trail, and the exhaust from the vehicle would also kind of confuse the dog's scent. So those are the two possibilities I see for how he left there. It doesn't really make sense that he just took off down a trail on foot and they couldn't pick up any scent trail and get some sort of direction of travel. So let's look at my three possible scenarios. The first one I actually find a little bit less likely. A lot of people commenting online just figure he's just this terrible, evil, psychotic person and committed the crime just to spite the ex-wife, and is out there trying to get away and enjoying the fact that he caused her a great deal of suffering. You know, I kind of doubt that, but you know, can't rule it out. I don't know him and what his state of mind was or anything. But if that was the case, if he planned the crime and planned on getting away, he could have easily either borrowed or stolen a car and had it pre-staged at the campground there so that he could leave the truck that he was known to drive and have a vehicle that was unknown. You know, and then he had a 3-day head start. He could have easily committed the crime and just driven north on Highway 97 and crossed into Canada that late afternoon or evening before anybody even knew that the girls were missing. You know, and from there, possibly drive west towards Vancouver, BC, abandon the car somewhere and just blend in with the homeless population there. He had been homeless for a while, knew how to live like that, you know, understood that lifestyle. So it's not impossible. He could be living among the homeless in Vancouver or one of the other cities up there, you know, and been long gone before the authorities even knew that a crime had been committed. Some people have suggested that he headed towards Mexico and, you know, did a search about Canada just to throw him off the trail. That's also possible. He had enough time, he could have made it there before anybody was looking for him. I think it's a little unlikely just because that's a long ways to go in a borrowed or stolen car and risking getting stopped along the way or any problems that might come up. It's far easier just to run up across the border into Canada, which isn't very far at all. So, you know, if he planned it and is such an evil psychopath that he wanted to stay living and on the run, then that would be my thoughts on where he is currently, not somewhere out in the mountains being chased around on foot. But I do find that scenario fairly unlikely regardless. Another possibility is also that he did commit the crime, but this one I think is a little more likely, that he was really having a breakdown and just terribly depressed about how his life was going. He divorced and barely being able to see the kids and unemployed and homeless, and everything was going wrong, and he owed people money, and you know, maybe he just got in such a dark place that he decided he was going to end it. And at that point, some people, for whatever irrational, crazy reason, decide that they want to take others with them, but they've already made the decision that they're not going to go on living. And you know, I've got to be careful with what I say here, because I don't want YouTube just to remove the video. And please, if anybody is having feelings like that, don't just think that ending things is the best route. You know, get some help. There's people that can really be beneficial, and you know, just know that a permanent solution to a temporary problem is not the way to go. But anyway, getting on with the topic, you know, it's possible that he had decided that he was going to end things, and for whatever reason, maybe decided in a delusional state of mind that if he took the girls with him, that they would be reunited in the afterlife or something. I don't know. I can't even wrap my head around that sort of logic, but it is possible. And if he did that, then, you know, if he committed the crime and had that in mind, then he would have, and fairly quickly after doing the crime, would have proceeded to, you know, finish his plan. Statistically, according to lost person behavior, somebody who's despondent or has mental issues, they rarely go very far from the last point known. I would say it would be quite likely, if this was the correct scenario, that he would be no more than a half mile from the campground. There are a couple of creeks that go either right by or through the campground. It's hard to tell by looking at maps, but somewhere in that general area, there's a couple of creeks that come down from the slope to the north. So I would think it was quite possible that he avoided detection there by going, you know, wading along one of those creeks up the drainage up on that mountain to the north, and found himself a place just a little bit out of sight up in the tree line there or something. So, you know, I don't know how thoroughly law enforcement has already searched the entire area around there. You know, maybe they've already done that and there's nothing there to find, but that would be a place that I would consider likely if that scenario is the right one. I just don't see too many other places around that he likely would have gone where he couldn't have been tracked. But if he were to go in the water somewhere and go a ways and then just complete the act, right, then he could be pretty hard to find unless people are specifically looking for that. So anyway, that's a scenario that is more likely in my opinion, and as I said, he would have done that fairly quickly. I think that by that Friday night, the day that the crime was committed, that he would have already been no longer living. So, you know, if that's the case, then law enforcement, when they get these suspected sightings, is probably some random hiker who just wants to avoid detection because they haven't paid for a pass or whatever, and trying to avoid getting in trouble. And I honestly don't think they've had any actual legitimate sightings. And then the final scenario that most people seem to discount, everybody just is assuming that he's guilty, but there is also still the possibility that someone else committed the crime. Again, I don't know what all details law enforcement has. They did issue a warrant for his arrest for murder charges, but none of the statements that I've seen have actually given any sort of forensic details that conclusively show that he did it, unless they have fingerprints or other things that directly tie him to the crime. There does still remain that possibility that he didn't do it. You know, we have to remember that he allegedly did the crime, and that until he's proven guilty, you know, until they come out with evidence that proves beyond any doubt, you know, there is a possibility that some other monster did it for their own purposes and then disposed of Decker to make it look like he did it and was on the run. And that could be one person, or even, you know, maybe more than one person could have done something like that. And I'm not going to speculate on any motives. I have some thoughts, but not really anything I want to get into here. But it is conceivable that that was the case, and that they then loaded Travis up in a vehicle and took him somewhere else to hide, to make it look like he was guilty and on the run. You know, and again, then he would have left the campsite in a vehicle, and it wouldn't have been trackable by dogs. So, and personally, just looking at the map, it seems, I doubt that somebody would want to transport a body in a vehicle down the road back towards civilization. It would seem more likely they would want to just dispose of it in a really remote area where they're not likely to get attention. And just looking at the map, not being real familiar with the area or anything, but just what I can see on the map, if that were the scenario, it would make more sense to put them in the vehicle, drive across the bridge to the south, and follow the road there out away from any prying eyes and find a convenient spot. So again, it wouldn't be all that far from the campground, but it could be someplace that was a little easier to conceal, and they would have had some time. But if somebody did that, they would probably still be in a bit of a hurry, just on the odd chance that somebody came along. So there is a possibility that remains could be found over in that area, you know, depending on decomposition and scavengers and such. But yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell. I think those are the three scenarios that are most likely. The second and third, I think, are more likely than the first, but not one of those scenarios involves him running around on foot in the Cascade Mountains or anything. And as I said, I could be totally off base. They might catch him out there, or he might come out somewhere on foot, you know, into a town or something and be caught then. It is possible. And, you know, I will update if anything comes out to conclusively prove me wrong there. But in the meantime, that's my three theories on what could have possibly happened. Feel free to comment down below and let me know your thoughts, and be happy to discuss any of that. This has been Republic Jim. I'll talk to you later.